At the first session this morning, Prime Minister Savio Bettel, when I asked him whether we should be thinking about meeting cyber threats in an offensive as well as defensive way, he said, well, probably not. I know that NATO is a defensive alliance, but do you think in more offensive ways of how to fight hackers, terrorist states?
Well, I should start by highlighting that the nation's mandate is indeed what it says, cyber defense. It's not as wide as cybersecurity, so we don't enter into issues like cybercrime and so on, but we're not entering the...
I think we have a problem with your microphone.
So...
I'm not sure it's on, actually, because I seem to be a lot louder. Is it?
Okay, now it's...
Now you're here.
So NATO's mandate is what it says, it's cyber defense, and compared to the EU that covers the whole cybersecurity spectrum, NATO has this niche, but it also not entering into the offensive domain according to current policy. I would say that NATO has been very cautious and very responsible in approaching this aspect. While cyber defense is part of NATO's core task of collective defense, and this has been acknowledged in the enhanced NATO policy on cyber defense adopted in September last year at the World Summit. We made a strong point at the same time that international law applies in cyberspace, which is a strong signal that NATO doesn't want to militarize the cyberspace. NATO doesn't want to have it as an ungoverned space. And I think it's also important to underline that during time NATO was very cautious in making this association between, for example, cyber and warfare. We saw examples of link between cyber and military operations, and I think 2008 in Georgia war was an example, and it wasn't before we saw new examples, like in the case of the Ukraine crisis, where again cyber was linked with what we call this hybrid warfare type of operation. So there are a couple of things that we see, and they're really worrisome. But again, we approach this with a lot of caution and responsibility. We support whatever evolution of international norms. We're not a source of international law, but we support the work of the governmental group of experts at the UN level. We support the development of confidence-building measures, for example, at the OEC level, and we had a briefing in the Cyber Defense Committee of NATO just the other year on this subject. We have supported through the Science for Peace and Security program of NATO, other kind of norms. So we are very much looking forward to establish a rules-based and law-based environment in cyberspace.
But doesn't that seem a contradiction in terms? I mean, the people you are thinking about. And incidentally, I guess the division that you're in charge of was, if I'm not mistaken, was created after 9/11. It was created to think about asymmetric threats. And at the time, that was considered more to be terrorism and how to fight terrorism. Now it sounds like you're thinking more about cyber security. But in both cases, you're talking about people who are not living in a world of norms, in a world of rules. Even less so than in the Cold War, where there were certain norms that were in place then.
First, the division was created in 2010, and this was in the run-up to the development of and to the approval of NATO's new strategic concept, the Lisbon strategic concept, which had a focus on what we call 21st century security challenges, emerging challenges, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, cyber was one of the domains, energy security as well. But I think there's no contradiction. You have to be able to defend yourself against all these kind of threats. And in cyber, we have a strong focus on resilience-based defense. The keywords are prevention, protection, resilience, response in this order. But at the same time, I think evolution of international norms and evolution of national norms in this field that should punish cybercrime or that should generate costs to anyone who'd attempt or succeed to generate such cyber attacks is something that is normal to support. So both defense but also support of international norms should not be contradictory.
What is the what tools does NATO have to fight cyber? I mean, I think there's a perception that we've picked up that you have not, that the countries that are at the leading edge of on cybersecurity are not sharing with NATO the tools that they've developed to fight.
NATO has developed first and foremost, I would say, quite substantive and far-reaching protection of its own systems. We have achieved what I would call centralized protection of NATO systems over 50 plus sites that start with NATO headquarters in Brussels, command structures, and then so on, points of contact at nations. And this was a long process. We had the initial operational capability of what we call the NATO Computer Incident Response Center back in the 90s, and we had the full operational of this centralized protection that has been reached last year. And of course, this is a kind of a term that comes from our procurement process, because there's never a full operation capability. You have always a process of continuously updating it. This means kind of awareness of what happens over NATO's networks. We have also analytical tools in place. We have arrangements of information sharing among allies. Also arrangements of information sharing with different partners, including international organizations, but also with partner countries.
But are you satisfied with how much?
We'll never satisfy it, because I'll tell you what we have, I'll tell you what we want to further achieve. Mm-hmm. We have introduced cyber defense capability targets in a planning process of NATO. It's called NATO Defense Planning Process. So this has generated more uniformity, interoperability, and so on and so forth. Also cyber into operational planning and operations. And of course, we're looking forward for the next level. Now, for example, training, education, exercises is a huge priority. We are introducing cyber dimension in each and every exercise, starting from typical operational military ones to crisis management exercises, or our annual cyber coalition exercises that takes place. NATO has a cyber range since last year, and it was based by the offer of the Estonian government to use their range in Tartu as the starting point, and then to develop it for the whole NATO. I think what is also a huge change of mindset, and I would say a new, also important policy requirement, is this NATO industry cyber partnership. There is an awareness that in cyber defense, no one can do it alone. And this partnership with industry should bring us to the next level. So we want to establish a partnership in information exchange, in innovation. So there's never enough. We have always to move on. And as we speak, we come with new initiatives, and looking forward to the next summit, which will be in next year. I think we're going to bring the cyber defense, both the capabilities, the procedures, but probably also policy elements to a next level.
Which country is doing the best?
Many countries are doing great. I would say all NATO nations have evolved tremendously, especially due to this defense planning process, which shows transparency between what countries have. And I'm speaking here about cyber defense capabilities. I'm not entering into the other domain. And I think that this has been enormously valuable. And of course, there, like in every place, there are a number of countries that stand out, but I would say there's a virtuous circle and positive.
Name one besides Romania. Who would?
No, I would pass on this one.
And who's the worst then? I'm sure you can answer this one.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, we're passing that way.
Yeah, we do have. I have to tell you, we do have a nice graph on capabilities, and I'm glad that also have met here colleagues from the Cyber Defense Committee, and we kind of show where countries are on the chart. Sometimes they have numbers from 1 to 28, but each country can ask whose place is one associated to what number, and it creates a virtuous circle. That's absolutely correct.
I'm sure country number one wouldn't mind if you revealed which country that
I'm not a judge of a beauty contest, so I will pass on this one.
How is cyber changing? How is cybersecurity concerns about it changing the nature of warfare? And then I do want to open up to the floor, but this is the one last thing I wanted to raise with you.
As I said, it brings. When I'm looking to NATO's role, which is defense of its allies, cyber adds a complete new level of complexity to the responses to this main role. It's the responses are different in terms of scope, methods, complexity. So cyber adds a new dimension to defense, to collective defense. Now, when you look to this link between cyber and military operations, and as I said, warfare is used with a lot of caution in NATO, which I have a positive reflex for which I have developed a positive reflex. When you look to this, I think you need to study its manifestation, then to analyze implications for NATO's business in terms of planning, operations, training, exercises. So this is something that is addressed within this broader concept of hybrid warfare. We do have the distinct strand of work on the cyber dimension. It definitely adds a huge, a new level of complexity, and for which we have to get the same level of complexity in response.
Has NATO been breached?
I'll give you. I'll give you some examples where we had. We are under attack probably as we speak. Let me mention this is a kind of daily business.
Who could it be?
Various sources, and again, I'm not going to have a beauty contest from this point of view.
That's probably the reverse of a beauty contest.
There is, in terms of classified systems who have increased level of security, and they are not linked to the internet and so on. We didn't have any evidence of any breach. In terms of business networks, what we had, and this was about a year ago, in March 2014, was a significant disruption, not a breach, a disruption. DDoS attack that has affected the NATO headquarters website for about 13 hours, and also some of the external business traffic due to the saturation. And that was, we had also an assumed attribution. It was a hacktivist group called Cyber Berkut. This happened the
Cyber Berkut.
This was the I think before 1 or 2 nights before the so-called referendum on the independence of Crimea, after NATO had a number of statements about the illegitimacy and illegality of such a referendum. So that was our most recent example. To be honest, after that, the element of the reputation counted more. I mean, we did not have such an event anytime before, so we reevaluated reputational risk. We introduced new mitigations. We had other attacks during the summer and during the summit in September last year that were about 3-4 times higher in terms of intensity or density, but then nothing happened because the measures were put in place. So this is one this is an example.
So how fast was it identified and contained? I guess 13 hours your systems were down.
I think it occurred at night, and it was back online. This was a night on a Saturday towards Sunday, and it was back at 9 o'clock in the morning. So it was solved overnight.
And what advice would you give other public or private institutions in how to defend yourself against these kinds of attacks?
Well, there's a lot, but I think the key word in this is the partnership. None of us is smarter than all of us, or none of us is more informed than all of us. And I think it's recognized that, for example, one of the strengths in NATO is that we have this information sharing among allies first and foremost on different levels. And it is a matter of trust. And based on trust, we have also information sharing with partner nations on the case-by-case basis, with other international organizations, with industry. You have to strengthen the blue team. Since the red team is so aggressive and the threat landscape is growing. So I think this is the name of the game, the teamwork. We're getting better informed, we can respond faster, we're getting smarter, and we can put in place more innovative and more effective countermeasures.
Great. I saw a question over here from Noel Knox.
Earlier in this morning, one of the first panel, we talked at length about the attack in Estonia in 2007 and the debate about whether or not it would trigger Article 5 for NATO, and they decided that the impact wasn't enough. But I think everyone in this room would agree it's just a matter of time before there is a cyber attack that escalates to the point where we all agree an attack on one is an attack on all NATO members, and you must respond. How would you respond to a purely cyber attack that triggers Article 5?
Well, the policy says that the response will be determined, will be based on a political evaluation by allies on a case-by-case basis. And frankly, this is how Article 5 was supposed to work from the very beginning when the Washington Treaty was designed. It wasn't designed to be generated by any thresholds, by any automaticity. It was supposed to be generated by a thorough political analysis and a political decision. In fact, the first and only time when Article 5 was invoked was after 9/11, which was a scenario that was never contemplated by the founding fathers. So we don't have any threshold policy or any automaticity policy, but we do have mechanisms of fast consultations, exchange of information, and actually also of fast political response and decision.
There's a question right here in front.
I'm Kurt Geisert. I'm a member of the team of external speakers of the European Commission. With visiting groups, we quite often have questions to cybersecurity. Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned NATO headquarters plus 50 points.
I think it's 53 as we speak, and the number will grow because we have a number of other sites that will add.
Okay, so you already give an answer to my question if you say the number will go. Because my question would have been, is the big number a question of security, or is it intended with a new NATO headquarter to reduce this number? But you say no.
Now, this is the concept of enterprise-wide protection by NATO, centralized protection based on common standards and high standards and specific requirements. It provides for better situational awareness. It provides also for efficiency, because we have this is addressed and managed by the NATO Communications Information Agency and CIA. They also manage the NATO Computer Incident Response Center, the rapid reaction teams that have been established and could be deployed at the different sites based on the necessity. So it's a matter of high standard of protection, but also efficiency, because you have one service provider that does this.
Please.
My name is Gunnar Borch. I'm a retired general manager of a NATO agency. I'm interested in the future cooperation with the European Union. At the last foreign ministers meeting in Antalya, it was a statement that NATO and EU would work closer together on cyber defense, but also on intelligence gathering and all those things. And that's been an issue.
Thank you for the question. I should start by saying that the EU is the organization with whom we already have a structured dialogue and structured relationship on cyber defense. First staff to staff relationship, but not only, because we have cross briefings to member states. We had a briefing from the EU at the Cyber Defense Committee earlier this year, and I had the chance to brief the political military group. So it's already structured. We also have, on an ad hoc basis, exchange of information between NCTC and CERT-EU, but we have a policy requirement and an action plan item to develop potentially technical agreement or memorandum of understanding, how it will be called, that should structure this. And this is one of the issues that we are working, because at least in NATO it has to be agreed by all allies according to our own procedures. And we hope to be able to respond to this requirement and also to the political expectations by our leaders that was very highly expressed in Antalya. I was there. This was one of the big headlines, this closer cooperation between NATO and the EU.
So you're sitting at NATO headquarters here. Who is your counterpart at Mons in shape? Is there a emerging threats command there? Is there a cyber command? I mean, what is the military doing together? Because we know what they're doing individually, but together.
We're entering into the governance and the management process. There is a cyber defense management board in NATO, and it includes 14 entities from headquarters, agencies, command structures. Through my position at headquarters, I'm also the head of the Cyber Defense Management Board. And for example, the head of the NCIA, NATO Communications Information Agency, is part of the board. The equivalent of the CIO at SHAPE, who is a two-star general, is part of the management board. Also, representatives from Allied Command Transformations, who are actually setting the requirements for the future capabilities, are also present. So this is how it works. And then we have a governance mechanism through the different committees: Security Committee, Investment Committee, Resource Policy and Planning Board, Command Control Communications, and then the Cyber Defense Committee, who is the kind of clearinghouse and has the lead policy role on cyber before everything goes to the NAC, who is the highest authority. And we actually streamlined this governance process before we approved the last policy, and it's reflected in the policy adopted last year.
But do you see NATO in the near term moving toward creating a kind of rapid reaction force just on on cyber? I mean, putting more military assets and sharing more assets in the way that you share AWACS planes or whatever, you know?
I cannot say at this point. I think we have not finished our analysis, our strategic analysis of what we call of the hybrid warfare, in which the cyber dimension is a distinct part, and I think everyone agrees is a growing part. So once we wrap this up, this debate, I think we can have more clarity in response.
And has the budget gone up? I mean, I guess probably even in your department. Because the budgets tell you everything, right? Where the priorities are. And
I think I can say we have invested significant resources. At least one important resource was this NATO computer incident response capability, centralized protection. That was an important investment. The truth is that the budgets are a bit divided in NATO because you have a military budget, you have a civilian budget. But we coordinate in such a way that the right resources according to the policy requirements and also to the requirements that are delivered by the risk management process in-house. So it is one of the domains that is having a positive dynamic in terms of resource allocation, but of course you never have enough. And
never have enough.
I want to stress this: you never have enough.
Especially when most members spend less than 2% of GDP on defense, right?
I think it's important to. I don't know if all members include their the expenditures on cyber defense fully in the defense budget. This is another interesting issue because in bringing all these metrics together. I mean, when we speak about 2%, some nations have less, but they say they don't include pensions. Others don't include the cyber aspect because it's not in the defense, necessarily linked to the defense ministry or not only to the defense ministry. So we have to make sure that when we use this just like target, we also harmonize the way the different sums add up to these targets. But it's true. I think it's now there is a strong conscience that security is not a gift that you can receive in a regime of gratuity.
Right.
This is I think a growing awareness in NATO. And of course, it's not easy to increase investment in security or defense when there are so many other requirements in a society, from education to healthcare and so on. And after a deep and quite long crisis, but that we had an investment pledge in Wales, and I think this is the direction in which we're going to move. And cyber will be an important component of this future investment in defense and security.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much. Ambassador Ducaru, our last speaker. Thanks so much for being here.